Governor DeSantis, who is using your words about don't be in the way, and he's saying I am in the way to block too much interference from the federal government. Your response, Mr. President?
Governor who?
DeSantis. Why is there
Do you have a comment about the comment that President Biden made recently?
Well, I guess I'm not surprised that Biden doesn't remember me. I guess the question is what else has he forgotten? Biden's forgotten about the crisis at our southern border, I can tell you that. Biden has forgotten about the inflation that's biting the budgets of families all throughout our country. Biden has forgotten about the demonstrators who are fighting for freedom down in Cuba. And Biden's even forgotten about the Constitution itself, as we saw with what he did with this moratorium. And I can just tell you, I'm the governor who protects parents in their ability to make the right choices for their kids' education. I'm the governor who protects the jobs and education and businesses in Florida by not letting the federal government lock us down. I'm the governor who answers to the people of Florida, not to bureaucrats in Washington.
What makes this worse is that DeSantis had a full day to prepare, and that's what he came up with. This is Florida's Republican governor responding to Biden, who had dismissed DeSantis' efforts to hinder the government's response to COVID with a raft of whataboutisms. After all, why would DeSantis actually discuss the issue at hand, which is a deadly pandemic, the epicenter of which is in his state, when he could talk about the border? Because what could be more important to the governor of Florida than a border 1,000 miles away? Granted, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that a Republican would desperately pivot to the border, because fear-mongering about brown people is deflection number one for the GOP. Let's not forget that every September and October of an election year, like clockwork, right-wing media has a collective fainting spell over the migrant caravans that are coming to America to rape your wives and sell drugs to your kids. And then the moment the election's over, poof, no more migrant caravans. Leading up to the 2018 midterms, Fox and Friends mentioned the invasion of migrants 19 times on Friday, 10 times on Monday, and 9 times on Tuesday, election day. And yet on Wednesday, mentioned merely one time in passing. It's almost like, and just bear with me on this one, Republican politicians use the prospect of an invasion of immigrants to scare their white base into voting for them. Why? Because they can't win on their agenda, so they have to defer to fear. And just like DeSantis definitely doesn't want to focus on his botched handling of this pandemic, he'll instead pivot to some trusty xenophobia to try and distract everyone from the real issue, which is that he's allowed Florida to become ground zero for COVID cases in the United States. He even mentions inflation, which is especially ironic because let's just think about this for a moment. In terms of why there's inflation, it might have something to do with the fact that as consumer trends rapidly shifted during the pandemic, a surge in demand for certain products sent prices higher, especially with goods like cars, furniture, bikes, and gas. And so knowing that the driver for inflation was the pandemic, wouldn't it make sense that inflation would only persist as long as the pandemic persists? And if so, wouldn't it make sense that the person leading the state that's currently prolonging the pandemic would be most at fault? Meaning, wouldn't Ron DeSantis be most to blame for inflation, the very thing he's trying to blame Biden for? Tell you what, you can always count on projection. I mean, DeSantis even brings up Cuba as a way to deflect from his own COVID handling. The guy brings up a literal foreign country because he's so incapable of acknowledging his own culpability managing his own state right here at home. It's a whole new level of deflection when your whataboutism is an unrelated protest in an unrelated country. But here's the worst part. As part of his low-rent comedy special, DeSantis says, I'm the governor who protects the jobs and education and businesses in Florida by not letting the federal government lock us down. Right, because nothing says protecting jobs and education and businesses like letting an economy-destroying pandemic surge. I think if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that COVID spreading uncontrollably has been a wonderful boon for jobs and education and businesses. At least we're all on the same page about that. In reality, thinking that you're somehow helping jobs by ignoring the root cause of the problem here is almost incomprehensibly short-sighted and misguided. Let me be crystal clear when I say this. The economy will never return to normal so long as a deadly virus continues to rip through this country. The only way for the economy to fully recover, the only way for all Americans to feel safe enough to go out and sit in stadiums and go to restaurants and shop in stores is for this pandemic to be over. And so by not only refusing to contain the pandemic, but actually allowing it to surge uncontrollably is only going to ensure that this pandemic continues to plague us. DeSantis might anoint himself some kind of savior, but he is clearly and objectively making things worse. And by the way, don't take that from me. The data clearly bears that out. Florida just today reported a record 22,783 new cases, its highest single-day case count since the pandemic began. The state's also seen record-breaking hospitalizations for the 5th day in a row. And even though Florida makes up just over 6% of the US population, the state accounts for almost 20% of the country's new cases. And we're now at a point where Florida's seeing not tens, but hundreds of deaths per day. And that's with a vaccine. We literally have a solution right in front of us, and yet still DeSantis has allowed the virus to be even worse than when there was no vaccine at all. If someone can explain to me how this is anything other than an egregious failure in leadership, I'd love to hear it. In reality, you would think that such horrific numbers would serve as a wake-up call for Ron DeSantis, not a justification for him to dig in his heels and continue entrenching the same policies and measures that exacerbated this crisis in the first place, like his order banning mask mandates at schools. But DeSantis isn't concerned with the lives of Floridians, he's concerned with his political career. And because the only way to succeed in the GOP is to be the most anti-science, the most defiant of expert medical advice, the most reliant on buzzwords like freedom and liberty in place of actual policy, DeSantis is more than willing to sacrifice the citizens of his own state, so long as he can continue padding his resume to fail up the ladder of the Republican Party. Florida may be primed to lose thousands and thousands of people in the coming weeks, but there's only one person who Ron DeSantis is concerned with, and that's himself. If you enjoyed that video and you're looking for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's a no BS look at the top stories of the week, along with interviews with the top names in politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, and more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, click the subscribe link right here on this screen to join the more than 1 million people who've already subscribed to my channel. And finally, to donate to my Don't Be a Mitch Fund, where I'm raising money for a whole raft of different voter outreach and voter registration groups in the closest states ahead of midterms in 2022, including Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. You can find that link on this screen as well. Thanks for watching.